How do you kill an immortal meme? The vampire, Dracula. One of the most persistent mythological memes of our civilization. The vampire has crept into the minds and lives of countless, and increasingly so with each generation. The most famous vampire, of course, is Dracula. His stories laid out the foundation for the modern characters that people admire and emulate. The unique characteristics of Dracula have a unique consequence, in that the meme itself takes on the traits of the myth. Dracula is undying, just as the meme persists across time, outliving us all and being reborn with each generation. Dracula contaminates others with his vampiric curse, generating more vampires just as the meme replicates itself in the minds of those who are exposed to the concepts and stories of vampires. Dracula has powerful psychic and mind control capacities, just as the meme has a powerful influence over the minds of the vulnerable. The young tend to be drawn to the vampire meme because it offers appealing themes, such as eternal youth and life, hypersexuality, control over others, and aversion to organized religion. The vampire is pure id, which is heavily repressed and poorly managed in the education of youth. As a result, the vampire meme becomes associated with trends of the era, such as wearing leather, or the pale and sickly aesthetic was popularized in the 90s. It rose with metal and goth scenes and the heroin-riddled rock stars. The vampire, especially Lord Dracula, is a commentary and archetype on the corruption of aristocrats, elites, nobility, and the class division. The vampire servants are reflective of the consumer class, which has manipulated the patterns of behavior through the influence of corporations, elites, and occult practitioners. An example of this would be in darker-themed subcultures, which embrace the undead aesthetic and enact anti-life behaviors, such as spreading anti-life and self-destructive patterns of behavior. Vampires create drones like undead slaves, zombies, which are in a similar theme as vampires, but symbolize the blind consumer, as opposed to the controller of the blind consumer. Essentially, the zombie is a brain-dead vampire, controlled by the head vampire. Alternatively, there are lower-class vampires that are still serving the head vampire, but maintain a degree of corrupted autonomy, knowingly enacting smaller-scale versions of the vampire archetype, such as being parasitic, psychologically abusive, manipulative, and venerating youthfulness. Of course, there is no actual immortality for those who emulate the vampire, but instead it translates to them dying young, making them a sort of sacrifice to the vampiric curse. The hypernormalization of the vampire was gradual but powerful. The modern era's depictions typically twist the vampire into a secular form, which negate its weaknesses and archetypal essence, enabling the meme to spread faster, with less consideration for consequences. Vampirism is framed as a virus as opposed to a demonic curse. Previous iterations carried weaknesses and traits conducive to its spiritual themes. Dracula's aversion to crosses reflects the vampire's inability to make self-sacrifices and the proclivity to sacrifice others to empower and sustain itself. Dracula is functionally an antichrist figure as a result, and this carries over memetically, as Christian philosophies are typically used as shields against corrupting or demonic memes to varying degrees of effectiveness. Christ and Dracula are adversaries in the Memetic war. The vampire does not appear in mirrors, pointing to the inability to self-reflect and be honest with oneself. Garlic is famously deadly to vampires, apparently because garlic contains a potent antibiotic called allicin, and since vampirism is a blood life force contamination, it may be that garlic was applied to the vampire because of its application to real-world diseases. Keep in mind that previous belief systems did not secularize disease, and viewed disease as part of a spiritual system. There's also sunlight, which burns them, which symbolizes the engraved fear of the corrupt to be exposed and scrutinized, both by humans and the sun, the source of all life on Earth. Modern representations tend to mock the weaknesses of previous iterations as myths or silly fairy tales, ignoring that vampires are myths and silly stories in of themselves. The trends of the last few decades have popularized vampires with media such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Blade, Underworld, Lost Boys, Twilight, 30 Days of Night, Interview with the Vampire. These stories represent the spectrum of perceptions on vampires, where sometimes they are purely monsters, other times they are presented as positive, and sometimes they tell stories about vampires having a form of redemption, or that they are flat out good, to the point of sparkling in the sun like weird diamond people. These depictions offer a hope for those enchanted by the vampire memetic curse, because the soul is not lost if mortality and self-sacrifice can be accepted. A silver lining to be sure, but even with this, such depictions still perpetuate the vampire meme and create replicas. It's hard to tell a story without a devil, and if you do depict one, it's inevitable that some people will end off worshipping it. Maybe some memes don't die, but change forms across time until perhaps we outgrow a need for them.
Thank you for tuning in. Feel free to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more episodes coming soon. Have a great one.